So that's our housekeeping, and we're going to jump right in. For quick introductions, I'm Trista Murphy. I'm a senior vice president here at Mission Wired. I use she, her pronouns, and I am based in Connecticut. I help Mission Wired kind of lead our nonprofit practice. So really thinking as we're thinking about nonprofit fundraising, really helping to set the stage of kind of what our strategy is, where we need to go, and make sure from an industry perspective we've got our ear to the ground. And I work with some of our largest nonprofit clients, including MD Anderson, City Meals, and a few others. And I'll pass it over to Shayna.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shayna Barrow. I use she, her pronouns. I am a vice president here at Mission Wired, specifically supporting nonprofit organizations, digital programs, working with some organizations such as RAIN and Mount Sinai Health System. So, really excited to be here and really excited to share our new tool.
Great. So Shayna's going to dive in. She's going to give us a highlight of our tool, and then we'll walk through it a little bit, and then we'll get to our trends.
Thanks. Okay, so we are super excited to introduce, I guess, this new tool from Mission Wired, what we're calling nonprofit trends, to really help nonprofits understand the changing landscape of fundraising, especially right now. So it's ever evolving and ever changing, and we found that this data can really help benchmark your programs and just see how things are stacking against the industry. We're this tool also is able to filter out by program size. So you're able to see how organizations like your size is performing across different metrics. And we're using about aggregate data from about 60 plus nonprofits to offer really that consistent and timely snapshot of the fundraising environment at the time. So with that being said, I'm excited to kind of do a live preview and bear with me as I work through these controls. Trista, can you see this? Okay, great. So if you come to missionwired.com/nonprofit trends, we will be releasing kind of a monthly snapshot of what these fundraising metrics look like every month. So if you start up at the top, we will be offering some like context and takeaways from some of our strategists to see like how these metrics are related to current events and anything from, something that's happening over internationally or something that could be happening domestically, or it could be something that's related to like technical changes. We're just really trying to provide some context and trends that we're seeing across different nonprofits and how it relates to these numbers at a whole. So when you scroll down here, you can see kind of some of the top line numbers. I think like, sorry, it's probably just the way my window is, but it'll show some of the top line numbers related to revenue, new donors, and average gift. And then if you scroll down a little bit more, you can see that you can kind of jump to some of these different metrics to see how it relates month over month and year over year and by organization size. So scrolling down just a little bit more, here is a top line table that is just a really high level snapshot of some of those key metrics. So we're featuring average revenue, average total gifts, open rate, click rate, new donors, and opt-out rate. And you can kind of toggle between year to date and previous month. So previous month would be May, of course. And you can see like the differences here. You can also, sorry, I need to move something around on my screen. You can also filter by organization size here. So you can see like what that looks like for a small organization or small program versus a medium one. And then you can see the differences and change of those metrics. So scrolling down a little bit more, we kind of drill down into each metric. So you can see in the bar chart the month over month view as well as the year over year. So here in May, you can kind of hover over the green, seeing that May 2025, the average revenue raised was about 181,000, and that's across all size nonprofits. And then you can kind of compare it to 2024 and 2023. And we'll kind of dig into some of these metrics and what that means in some of our presentation. And then again, you can kind of toggle between like small, medium, large sizes. And so that kind of goes on for every metric. So you can kind of scroll down and see how that relates to your program, um, goes into acquisition as well as like email engagement. So that's basically it. It's very simple and easy to use. We really love this so far, just to like kind of see how everything plays out and have that like real-time snapshot. So let me go back real quick to the presentation. Okay. So all of that being said, we're really excited to share this tool out with other nonprofits, just to get that detailed look at the fundraising landscape and how digital metrics are trending in real time. And we're kind of recommending or in working with our partners to benchmark program results. So, we might notice that May donors are lower than last year. This is a great place to go to see if like that's how other organizations are seeing their trends. And then, of course, just seeing and having that industry-wide takeaway and recommendations from some of our mission wired strategists at the top of the monthly overview. And I'll pass it to Trissa.
Great. So diving in, when we look at January 1st through May 31st between 2024 and 2025, we're seeing a little bit of softness across both number of gifts and average raised. And so when we think about, average raised, that is the average per member that or per organization that's in this grouping of data. And so on average between May and January and May of last year, members had raised about $1 million on average. And then looking at this year, they're falling just slightly behind at 926,000 raised. And then for gifts on average, we had 24,000 gifts last year and 19,000 gifts this year. But we have an increase, just a small 1% increase in new donors on average this time frame compared to last. I think looking at this particular time frame is really interesting because we had a really interesting start to 2025. I know a lot of you on this call were probably responding. There were a number of federal funding issues that were coming out. There were a couple of emergencies when you think about natural disasters and the like that were happening, and so it was a really interesting start to the year. And so it's interesting to see how this fell. And when we looked at our results in April, trends were a little bit higher, right? We saw a little bit of a push in April, and then when we looked back this earlier this month at May, we decided we needed to do some filtering there to really account for that, to make it parity, to make it kind of put us all on even ground. And so that's why you're starting to see some of these declines when you look at the overall results at a high level.
Yeah, so looking at overall revenue, you can kind of see that it's been that tough fundraising environment, especially as you kind of see the decrease in that green bar for 2025 year over year, especially since February. And we of course like believe this is kind of an effect of some of the challenges that we're seeing with the funding environment, effects of fundraising or funding cuts on organizations, and just general economic uncertainty that could lead to donor hesitation. So, this could, of course, like differ from by sector and size of the organization. We are starting to see some strong performance for those that are directly impacted by some of those environmental factors, but are also fundraising in response to that. But other organizations that might not be directly impacted, or a little bit more indirectly impacted, are kind of trying to feel out what that organizational comfort and balance is to make sure that they are still serving their communities and making sure that the need is still being communicated to their donors.
And so when we look at that breakout by small, medium, and large organizations, we see a variability here. And so I think it's helpful for us to maybe talk about what we mean when we say small, medium, and large. Organizations are not t-shirt sizes, right? But it helps us kind of frame our thinking around where does my organization fit amongst this cohort of data? And so when we talk about small organizations, we have those are organizations that are sending less than 100,000 unique emails in a month. Medium is anywhere from 100,000 to just shy of 300,000, and then large is anyone who is sending unique 300,000 or more unique email addresses in a month. And so you've got some similarities between your small and your large, right? Small coming in at about 15% behind last year, and large coming in at about 14% behind last year. And you really see those medium organizations, right, at 25%, really bringing in, a 25% increase year over year. I think that there are a few things that we can assume from this data. Smaller and larger organizations tend to be a little bit less nimble, right? There tends to be a little bit more process and procedure in place. Sometimes there will be a little bit of hesitation, and I feel like medium organizations maybe sometimes have a little bit more leeway. They can be a little bit more nimble. They can kind of respond in the moment. And so I don't think that's to say, if I think there's probably organizations in all three of these buckets that are skewing either one way or the other. And so I think it's really just good trending data to say, like, am I behind or am I above? Where am I, where's my organization performing in the midst of these other organizations? And so I know that can be helpful, right? If you're a smaller organization and we, give a stat that, everyone's seeing a 25% increase. Well, that's not helpful to me personally. If I'm a smaller organization, I kind of want to see how I can benchmark myself amongst my peers. And so just a little bit of framework for your thinking there.
Okay. So now that we kind of framed it with the revenue, we also took a look at average gift. And when you're looking at average gift from 2024 to 2025, you do see a lower average gift overall, especially for this calendar year. So although it looks slightly, slightly lower, just by like $2 or $4 or $5, when you apply that smaller average gift across thousands of donors and gifts, of course, it can make a huge impact on revenue. So while increasing response and trying to get more donors to donate to your organization during this time, of course, it's also very important to try to increase that average gift and make up some of that revenue gap.
I think what's really important about this table, Shayna, is that for so long in the industry, we were seeing almost the opposite of this, right? Where we were seeing number of donors down, but average gift increasing. And I think it's really interesting to see that we're kind of trending a little bit downward now. And so I think, as we're fundraisers, what that implication is for our programs, right? Typically when we see donors come into the fold, we see average gift go down. And when we see donors stepping back out of the fold, we see average gift increase because our loyal donors are showing more loyalty. And so I would put a pin in this for those of you watching from home and keep a close eye on this and kind of compare it to your own results. Like, what are you seeing? Are you seeing more donors come into the fold? Is that driving your gift down? Are you seeing more donors give more, or less donors give more? I think it's just a question, just from like a weather bell perspective, right? Of what are we seeing? Where at the moment that we are? And we'll get into that in a little bit. But, just to kind of maintain your program for the rest of the year? Is this a trend, or is this kind of just something we're seeing in this moment?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And another idea is to go to like that benchmarks, the nonprofit trends website, and then filter it out by the program size, because this
Yeah.
could look very different depending on the size too.
So now we get into acquisition. I think this slide is really interesting. And if you know me at all, and I see some very familiar names in the chat, so I know that some of you know me, you know that I am a huge fan of acquisition. I think you cannot have a good a retention strategy that outpaces a good acquisition strategy, but you also can't have a good enough acquisition strategy that's going to outpace your retention strategy. So they're like peas and carrots, peanut butter and jelly, peanut butter and fluff, whatever your favorite, whatever your favorite analogy is there. But I think it's really interesting to see the trend on acquisition in 2025 compared to previous years. And I think a lot of us would say this is probably not a surprise. I'm sure many organizations are pulling back on budget, looking really critically at where can we get the most from our donors, where can we be using the tools we've got in our tool belt to the best of our ability. And so, in 2023 in May, we were doing about 10% new acquisitions to file. In 2024, that was down to 9. And then in 2025, we're at about half of where we were in 2023. So we're at 5% new acquisitions to file. In 2025. So, I don't think it's a surprise, but I think it's definitely something we want to be paying attention to. If, you've got your foot on the gas and you let up just a little bit to coast down the highway, uh, what could you be doing to maybe put your foot on the gas a little bit more? Are you missing an opportunity while others are not acquiring new donors to acquire donors for your organization at a moment when it might be a little bit quieter? I think budget constraints are budget constraints, right? We can't talk our way out of that. We can't, solve our way out of that. But what could we do, right? If you can find the budget, if you can find the moment, I think now is certainly a time to be paying really close attention to acquisition in the digital spaces, because it seems like, from what we can tell here in May, people were taking their foot off the gas a little bit. And so, don't ever want to get caught on your back foot when it comes to acquiring new and ready donors for your program. So we took a look at kind of the overall metrics, right? We're seeing some softness coming into 2025. I'm sure no one on this call is surprised at all to see that. And I'm sure some of you are actually seeing quite the opposite when you're looking at your metrics, and that's an incredible feat. We're going to go through some case studies now of things that we've seen for some of our clients, and kind of and talk about, what have we seen this so far this year? Where are folks going? The first two case studies we'll share are anonymized, only because they are organizations that are responding to some critical moments, and so they've asked us to kind of keep their name behind the fold. But for our first organization here, it was happens to be one of my clients. After receiving word that federal grants would not continue, a partner of ours who works in the poverty relief space developed a series of continued appeals to keep donors and prospects updated. They went out with some really bold, really direct messaging of, our federal funding has been cut and we can't continue our work without you. And through the series of messages, they've seen some really incredible results. They've grown year over year revenue by 123%, and we've exceeded revenue projections by over 250%. And that's just through, I want to say through May. And so really, we've basically met our yearly revenue goal just in the first 5 months, which is incredible to see. And from those gifts that we've achieved, 18% of those gifts have been from prospects. And so you're seeing, you've got, I think on the previous slide, we had 5% of new to file acquisition. In this case, this organization is doing about 18% of conversions from prospects, which is really incredible to see. And so, thinking about, well, my organization can't respond in that way. We've got you covered. We're going to give you some good takeaways at the end, to think about how you can be creative there. And then our next case study is another anonymized case study. It's one of our international humanitarian organizations, and they've responded to a number of emergencies this year, from the California wildfires and the Myanmar earthquake to crises in Gaza and Ukraine. They've really leaned into these moments because their work is critical in those spaces. They, come in when others can't and help where they can. And so they've seen 160% return on ad spend while converting 10,000 new donors, which is incredible to see. I meant to pull up our stat, but looking at our stats from before, when you're thinking about, the average nonprofit saw about 19,000 gifts on average from May to June, and this organization saw 10,000 new donors in this time frame. So really incredible results there. And then they had a 270% return on SMS acquisition campaigns while adding an additional $400,000 in revenue. And so thinking about strategies you can be utilizing in this moment, where are the channels that you're not active? What are some easy places to stand up? Or maybe what are some channels that are underperforming, that you can really push the limits on and see if you can be getting more. I think particularly if you're thinking about budget cuts, right? Like getting more out of the places where you already are is probably going to yield the best results.
Great. So I'm excited to kind of share another case study for RAIN and their April campaign, which is Sexual Assault Awareness and Prevention Month. So unlike the other case studies that we showed you, which are more about funding cuts and rapid response type moments, RAIN had a great campaign in April, or great success for their campaign in April, which was mostly just more of an evergreen campaign and a tentpole campaign for the organization. They had a very comprehensive campaign that featured fundraising matches, different incentives. We had content about ways they can get involved by advocating, by walking, by fundraising. We also had a survivor story where she climbed Mount Everest in April in support of RAIN. And then they also rallied around a Congressional Day of Action. So there was a lot of movement and action that was happening in April for RAIN, and it really, drove a lot of new donors to come support them. So by pairing all of this activity that they had in April with some of their active acquisition strategies, they were able to kind of amplify that campaign even further and convert a really significant amount of new donors. So in April alone, 67% of all of their direct response donors were new. So we had a pretty robust acquisition strategy where we were able to convert a lot over different digital channels. And then overall, they raised about 6 times the revenue than last year. So you might be thinking like we're not responding to funding cuts, or we don't have like a rapid response to respond to. There is still a lot of opportunity in some of these evergreen or tentpole moments for organizations. Okay, so now we kind of are going to just talk about a couple strategies that you could explore and implement coming into the summer and the fall season. So the first one I feel like we've kind of mentioned throughout the presentation is seizing the moment and finding your relevancy. So even if you're not directly impacted by what's going on, current events or anything like, or the funding cuts or anything like that, you may not be directly impacted or indirectly impacted, but it's really likely that some of the communities that you serve are. So I think that that's how a lot of organizations are kind of finding their relevancy, is like, even though like SNAP cuts might not directly impact a food bank, it's the fact that the SNAP cuts are impacting the families in the community, which is creating like this increased need for food banks to fill in that gap. So it could be anything that that's relevant to you and your organization and your mission. And if not, then create it. So like like the SAPM campaign with RAIN, we've seen a lot of success with like awareness type campaigns, like awareness month campaigns, or like giving days that organizations will create during these more evergreen months. And then the second strategy here is, of course, exploring opportunities for expansion. So as Trista mentioned, acquisition investments are almost half of what they have been in previous years. And in some of the case studies that we saw, acquisition can kind of help stop that leaky bucket. So even if donors are declining, acquisition will help you, find those new donors that might be able to support you during this year.
Yeah, and I think that these are both really important strategies, right? I think we never want to encourage organizations to be disingenuous to your mission, but the fact of the matter is that so many organizations help communities that are already underserved, right? Help communities that are already up against tremendous odds. And so, making sure that we're thinking holistically about how we approach that, the work that we do in those spaces, and then, thinking about the generosity that folks are giving in this moment. I think we've seen an outpouring of support, as we often do when we are up against moments like we are right now. And so, making sure that your voice, your mission is being heard in that moment, because you are helping communities who need it, and you are doing important work that we need to fund for the future. And so, just thinking about that in really creative ways, and thinking about making sure that you're taking the opportunity to expand your mission. And then when you're thinking about acquisition, donors do want to give right now. Folks are constantly looking for those philanthropic outlets. And so acquisition is a really good time to, or now is a really good time to expand that acquisition, because donors are looking, and, it just might not be that they don't know where to find you or you haven't found them yet. And so really thinking about how you can expand not only from acquisition, but also in other places, which I think we start to talk about on the next slide. Yeah, so thinking about, program diversification. Are you shopping in your own closet? Are you thinking about folks who haven't been active in a while? As Shana and I were prepping for this, we were talking about COVID donors, and I was saying, I was kind of waxing poetic about, well, the last time we saw this big boom of donors coming into the fold was during COVID-19. And so is now a critical time when you can kind of go back and reactivate those donors and remind them of the critical nature of your work. I think it's right for the opportunity. And I think sometimes we forget about those lapse donors because, we've tried the pre-lapse automations, or we've tried the stop lapse campaigns, or, we've tried to get them in the mail, and, sometimes we write them off. But taking a look at your data, like finding a partner who has the data behind them to kind of dig in there and kind of prime those audiences, or find those audiences that are prime for that giving, could be really critical in this moment. So it's not just about acquiring new donors, but also going back and finding who once was loyal and might need a small reminder. And then consider non-cash giving. I think I was having a conversation with a colleague in the industry earlier today, and we were talking about how it's all about DAFs lately. And so DAFs are a great opportunity to get folks in the fold. That's not necessarily cash that's coming out of their bank account, right? It's money that they've put aside for this reason in particular. And so, reminding folks that that's an option. I think we don't do a great job about it in the digital space. I think we're just starting to kind of break the mold there and kind of think about how we convert DAF, which is traditionally an offline opportunity, into the online space. There are some great partners out there, that are doing some really critical things with DAF giving, and making it really easy, or easier than it had been in the past. And so, we've got some examples here from some partners that we've worked with that ran some DAF campaigns. I know we had DAF Day, not too long ago, and that's coming up again pretty soon. So, thinking about those other opportunities, QCD, planned giving, right? There are other ways to bring donors into the fold where they might not be able to make a cash donation today, but they can commit their loyalty to you in the long run. And then leaning on partners to navigate challenging environments, going to your agencies or going to your trusted consultants and saying, help me understand kind of what's happening here. Where am I sitting amongst my peers? Where can we go? Not to toot our own horn, but this is our webinar, so why not? Using things like the Mission Wired Nonprofit Trends tool, to kind of help benchmark yourself. We're going to hopefully be, well, not hopefully, we will be updating these monthly. And so it'll be a place you can kind of bookmark and come back to and kind of check in on how the year goes on. If you loved our webinar today, give us a shout. Maybe once a month, we'll kind of give you a recap of where we are in the industry, and where we think you're going. But, leaning on your partners to kind of help you build that portfolio and that toolbox. And then thinking about opportunities and uncertainty. I think the worst thing that we can do is nothing, right? And so if the moment calls for it, really thinking about how your mission can be authentic and critical in that moment, and really, letting donors know. I think just giving them the small update that, hey, this is happening, we know, we're on it, is oftentimes the best thing we can do. And the worst thing that we can do is kind of sit and wait and hope that the answer will come to us. Springing into action, often is the best thing. And so, asking your partners to really navigate that with you and help you understand, what the opportunities are for you in that moment could be really critical as well. And so that brings us to the end. We chatted a lot at you. We got some really good questions during the presentation. We can just cover those live. Meg asked if this was online giving only, and yes, it is. We hope to. She asked follow-up, will we do it for other channels? And we do hope to add other channels in the future. And then anonymous attendee asked what the metrics were for small, medium, and large. And so I put that in the chat, so you had that as a takeaway. But just as a reminder, small is anyone under 100,000 unique email addresses. Medium was anyone between 100,000 and just under 300,000, and large was 300,000 plus. So You've got those answers there. If there's anything else that came up for you while we were talking, we'd love to hear about it. We really appreciate everyone spending the afternoon. This wrap up, maybe if you're on the East Coast, or middle of the day if you're on the West Coast. We appreciated you spending the time with us. We'll give it a second for any other questions, but appreciated having you here.